And I'm Jocelyn.
And you're listening to the Why Can't We Talk About It podcast. So Jocelyn, how have you been?
I've been doing very well. I am enjoying the new year. We are a few weeks into it now, and I'm having a good time sticking to my resolutions like we talked about a few episodes ago. One thing that I've been doing this week is digitizing my wardrobe. I think that I had mentioned that I'm going to do that so that I can just wear more of it, visualize it a bit better, have more fun styling outfits because I just keep wearing the same sweatshirt and leggings combo. I'm about halfway done digitizing what I have here. When I say here, I mean my current closet here in the US where I'm living right now. I still have an entire closet in Toronto that I'm going to need to digitize.
Yeah.
It's actually a lot of fun. I think the initial setup is very difficult because it involves categorizing and cataloging every single item that I have. But I'm using an app, I think I mentioned it before too, called the Wearing app, Whering, to do it. And I really like it. So I am feeling very productive. How about you?
So I'm doing pretty well as well. Yes, we are definitely a couple of weeks into the new year. So far, it's actually been pretty good. I've just been working, trying to get through the weather. It's wintertime, but honestly, it's snowing just a bit. It's raining most of the time. I hate it. I'm not a fan of rain. I don't want to jinx it, but I would prefer snow. I think I'd rather deal with that than to have to deal with rain. So, personal preference.
I would rather deal with neither and enjoy the 17 degrees and sunny weather that's on the forecast for me tomorrow, not to rub it in.
Yeah, except you still did. So, but that's okay. I'll give you a pass on that one.
I'll send sunshine your way. I'm sending good vibes.
Thank you. So for this week, do you have any recos for us?
I do. I have a reco that I think is going to catch you completely by surprise because
nice.
It's everybody I've told has been like, I cannot believe that you like this. But when my family was here visiting a little while ago, we had a movie night in, and my brother insisted that we watch Top Gun 2. And I had no interest. I didn't see it in theaters. I was like, this just seems like a lot of dudes. I don't really like a lot of dudes. I'm a girly girl. I like movies that are for the girls. So it just never crossed my mind to watch it. I was in the minority. Everybody else wanted to. And so we did. And I loved it. Yes. I absolutely loved it. I was obsessed. I am so sad that I didn't see it in theaters. Officially starting the petition now for it to play every summer in theaters in perpetuity. It's just such a feel-good movie. It's so good. It has everything that you could possibly want. It has great one-line zingers. It has attractive people. It has a topless beach football scene. It has predictability, but also just the right amount of tension. You know everything's going to work out, but it still keeps you on the edge. Wow, what a masterpiece, Tom Cruise.
That's actually a great description. I'm surprised I haven't recalled that before. Have you not seen the first one then, I'm assuming?
I have not.
Okay, I guess it doesn't really matter, but they do bring back a lot. I think there's a lot of fan service for people who've seen the first one, especially given that one came out, I think it was 1986 when that came out. So I loved it. I mean, I saw it in theaters. I had a great time. I unfortunately didn't get to see it in IMAX, which is I think what it was originally shot for. If that ever comes up as a chance where they bring it back, I definitely go watch it again. I know for me, I kind of like re-seen it a few times now since the theaters, and I catch new things each time. And this is a podcast about feelings and emotions. I felt stuff that that I would not think about for some kind of Top Gun action movie. I felt things. I was excited, but I think even, obviously without spoiling it, but the ending, I remember feeling a bit teary-eyed. I was like, oh, I wasn't expecting this, but I did. And it was a great ride all the way through for me. So I'm glad you watched it.
Oh, it's so good. Do you like the first one better or the second one better?
The second one.
It's so funny. Everybody I've talked to has said that. So I don't really feel the need to watch the first one. I've also heard that it was very of its time. So it might not have aged as well. And it might have some themes of today's topic for our episode, actually. Top Gun 2 or Top Gun Maverick is just so feel good. It's just so feel. It's very feels. There's so many feels. I love it.
From the first one, I remember when I rewatched it before I went to watch the recent one, there were definitely some parts where I was like, it felt a bit cringy for me.
Okay.
It just felt like, I don't think this will fly.
Nice one.
I don't think it would be appropriate today to do and just to make in general. So I think either they had the feedback or maybe it just came out 2022, but I know it was made, I think, 2020. And so times have changed then. So maybe they knew that and they're like, yeah, let's not do the exact same thing over again since times have changed for the better.
I love it.
Yeah.
So good.
Thank you for that.
How about you? What's your reco?
So my reco is a book that I read not too long ago. It's something that I think is somewhat tied to our theme as well today, but it's definitely not what I would consider a feel-good read. It's definitely something that's a bit more serious. However, it's actually something that I think if there ever was an idea for a future episode, maybe it might be worthwhile to go a little bit more of a deep dive into it, because I think it touches on things that, even though I know it happens in real life, I don't think we really discuss it too much. So it's a book. It's called Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men. And the author's name is Lundy Bancroft. This book, what it kind of goes into is to talk about people who are in relationships with men who are abusive, for one, and who are angry and controlling. And I know that this author is a counselor. He specializes in working with abusive men. And this book kind of goes to kind of understanding how that comes to be. And not only is it for understanding the men, it's also for the partners of these men in terms of how to improve their life, survive, or even leave an abusive relationship. I read it because, as you know, Jocelyn, that Danny likes to be on Reddit a lot. Sometimes I come across these posts that people put in their relationship posts. And a lot of times it's from women just saying like, hey, my boyfriend or husband did these things. He hurt me or he hurt my kids. Sometimes they ask, what should I do? Sometimes they'll even go, is this normal? Like, is this okay? I would read it and go, I can't believe this person thinks it's okay that this is happening to them, or that somehow they think it's normal, or that they have to go online to the internet to ask a bunch of strangers, hey, is my relationship okay? Or is it just me? They talk about being gaslit by their partners into these relationships and they don't know how to get out, they don't feel safe and so forth. And I remember in one of the comments, actually a few of the comments in different posts, this book came up. And so I decided to read it because I was kind of interested in terms of like, yeah, why does this happen? Why are certain people like this? Because I know it's not all men, but there are majority of men in this book, as it explains, that definitely more so men than women who can be more controlling and abusive. But also, what do people do? I think that when people are in these relationships, I think sometimes people just don't know how to talk about it and how to approach it. And I think that if there was more people who had the awareness and information to understand, I think it would make things a little bit better. So that's why this is a reco for this week. If needed, I think I would be willing to dedicate a whole episode for a deep dive on this, because I think it's probably more important, I think, than we realize.
Wow, thank you, Danny. Thanks for sharing. And I think it's really incredible that you came across some of these posts, and instead of being a keyboard warrior and weighing in, you actually decided to do some research and take it upon yourself to read more about the topic. And now we have this great reco from you. So thanks for that.
You're welcome. The reason why I think that our recos today kind of touches on today's topic is because our topic for this week's episode is toxic masculinity. I think it's a topic that I wanted to bring up to the listeners, but also with Jocelyn's, because this is a phrase that I know I've heard about it here and there, never really looked too much into it, had an idea what it is, but I thought it'd be good to talk about it some more. And of course, people might hear that and be like, well, what the hell is that? What does that mean? I think for me, just kind of breaking it down is maybe just thinking about as well, like, what is masculinity in the first place? I know I have my own definition, but I was looking up a few things, and I think one of the ways to describe it is that masculinity refers to the roles, behaviors, and attributes seen as appropriate for boys and men in a given society. Basically, it's kind of like saying masculinity refers to society's expectation of males. However, when we kind of dig a little deeper, I think in many societies, boys and men are expected to be a few things in general. Those include being strong, active, aggressive, tough, daring, heterosexual, emotionally inexpressive, and dominant. This is enforced by many ways, including socialization, media, peers, and just other influences in general. And it definitely plays out in the behavior of many boys and men. However, the term toxic masculinity, though, points to a particular version of masculinity that is unhealthy for the men and boys who conform to it, and also harmful for those around them. When I think about that, I guess the way I would kind of look at it, and Jocelyn and I, let me know if you disagree or agree or have your take on it. My take on it is basically toxic masculinity is when you're a male and you kind of can't be yourself because of all the expectations that you have learned over time, and that it alters your behaviors in a way that I think for a man or a boy, it's like you think you have to be like this, but it's actually not good for you or anyone around you at all.
Yes, I think that's definitely your lived experience, and I'm very curious to learn more about how toxic masculinity has affected your behavior and basically who you are and how you move through the world. But just to back up a little bit, like you mentioned, it's important to understand what toxic masculinity is. There is a difference between masculinity and toxic masculinity, because just being masculine doesn't necessarily mean that you are exhibiting toxic behaviors. And Danny, you did mention that masculinity is associated with the traits that men and boys are brought up to have, but both men and women can have masculine characteristics. Mm-hmm. Men and women can have feminine characteristics as well. And you listed a bunch. Many of them are, I'd say, very typical masculine traits, like being dominant, being strong. But a few of the ones that you listed, I would already characterize as toxic. For example, you listed violence, I think you said.
Aggressive?
Aggressive, yeah. I think to a point that's up for interpretation. That's where it gets a little bit gray. Mm-hmm. Not all masculine traits are toxic. However, when they veer into that belief that shut down men being able to show any feminine traits, mm-hmm. that's where it becomes really bad. I saw this from the New York Times. There are a few main traits or behaviors that fall under toxic masculinity: suppressing emotions or masking distress, maintaining an appearance of hardness, violence as an indicator of power, so tough guy behavior. Just like you mentioned, Danny, toxic masculinity is what can come of teaching boys that they can't express emotion openly, that they have to be tough all the time, and that anything other than that makes them feminine or weak. I'm very curious to see how this affected you because, as we know, toxic masculinity hurts women and it hurts society overall. But I don't think we talk a lot about how it can affect men, especially in today's world where I know we've come a long way, but there's still a huge subset of men out there who don't believe that toxic masculinity even exists, or they want to take back the word, embrace it, like Andrew Tate and co. Like just the complete opposite. Like they're just awful, awful men and people. So it's hard for men out there to really express themselves. Growing up for me, I know that even I was taught that the worst thing that you can be is a girl. Even I was taught that you don't want to throw like a girl. You don't want to run like a girl. You don't want to wear that color because it's too girly. Like all of these things were taught to us from a very young age. And as much as it has affected me, I'm so curious to see how it has affected you.
Yeah, I think like the way you described that and from the articles too, I think they bring up a lot of good points. I think one thing that might also kind of help in terms of visualization is the masculinity or being a guy or being masculine is there is a way that all men and boys are supposed to be. I think that's when it gets really tricky because it's like, oh, there's a box and it says masculine and every single man, boy are supposed to fit in that box. And then it's like, okay, well, what if I don't fit in that box? Am I no longer masculine? But I want to be masculine. I want people to see me as such. I must fit in it. I think that's when things start getting really unhealthy because a bunch of guys in the world and that I've seen or been around or including myself will do things where it's like, it's not really me, but it's like, okay, well, but if I don't do this, what are people going to think of me? Yeah, they might call me girly, a pansy. I think one word that I remember from as a kid, it's like a bunch of guys will throw around the word like, oh, if you did that, then you're gay, which I think about that now. And I'm like, oh, that's a horrible thing to say. But that was such a common word being thrown around among school kids at the time. Even for me, I think just, yeah, you make a good point. Like playing sports is a good one, is a good example where it's like all the guys that I grew up with in the playground and in school, you know, if you didn't do things well, you're going to be made fun of because it's like, well, you're a guy. You have to be good at these things. Sports are, I guess, quote unquote, for guys, and they should be. If you don't, you get made fun of, you get called names, and it's important that you kind of fit into that idea of what being a man is. That's one. I think one that you brought up, and I think obviously we've chatted about, especially for this podcast, of emotions and feelings is don't have feelings. The one that you're allowed is to be angry, I think, for a lot of guys.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of being sad or crying, even if it's things that clearly is like, how could you not? It's like, oh, well, man up.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one, I think. It's like, oh, you told, oh, you stop crying, man up. That's what you're supposed to do. Guess that implies like, well, if you're a man, you don't cry, right? And in that moment when you're crying, you're not being a man. That's why you got to man up. Or another one for, I think for younger kids, depending on their age is, well, boys don't cry. And I think that's something that comes up a lot. Boys don't cry. I'm sure that I kind of have vague memories of maybe being punished for crying as a kid. Whether or not it's an annoyance to the adults or they just didn't like seeing a boy cry, that wasn't allowed. And so I think that's another example, especially when I was much smaller. However, I think when I think about what affects me, where I think the idea of being masculine kind of goes off the rail a bit, I think more stuff that I can remember more as like an older child or as an adult. One example that is the idea of not wanting to look weak. I think it's the idea that, oh, if you're a man, if you're masculine, you have to be strong. And looking weak is just not allowed. And that takes many different forms, I think, whether it's like physically, where it's like, oh, if you're a guy, you need to make sure you're like working out a lot. You got to look like you work out so that you can look strong and be a tough guy. If you're not, then they may call you girly. I know that's one. I think that's very harmful because not everybody needs to be like that. And not everybody has the interest to be like that. But just the idea that if you don't do that, there are going to be people who will look at you as not manly or masculine enough. I think that's where all this toxic stuff is happening.
And also, why is it a bad thing to be quote unquote girly or feminine? And also, very feminine girls do go to the gym.
I know this topic is about being masculine, but I know there are women who grew up with this idea who says, oh, if you go to the gym and you work out, don't lift weights because you're going to become manly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that's not true. You know that's not true, but there are people who believe that.
But do you know why women don't want to look manly or quote unquote manly? Because of the patriarchy? Because if we look too manly, then men won't be attracted to us. It all comes back to the patriarchy, Danny. Just like toxic masculinity does.
Yeah. And I think that's why this piece, when you say, oh, it also hurts women too, it's like, yeah, it does, right? Just this example of being fit or lifting weights. The idea that, okay, well, if you're a guy, you must lift weights. If you're a girl, you can't. What's the big deal? Is what I think. Like, hey, you want to, you don't want to, it's up to you. That's your thing. But I think that's when this whole subject gets thrown out of whack. Another example, so this one's not mine. I remember there's a friend of mine so he's a guy, and there was a time where we all liked to go to, there's a dessert place called Dimitri's. I don't know if you've been there before.
Yep.
Yeah. And, great place. They got different options for desserts, cakes, ice cream, so forth. This one friend of mine, he's a guy, he actually really enjoys this drink. I think it's like a strawberry milkshake, but he refused to order it.
Oh no. Why? Because it was pink?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
He wouldn't order it because he was like, okay, but if I order this, then the waitress is going to think I'm some like girly dude.
Oh no.
And so he would ask, I think, his girlfriend to order it for him. They would bring it over, give it to his girlfriend, and then she would slide it over to him and he would have it.
Oh my gosh.
I remember thinking at the time, like, well, that's just ridiculous. Like, who cares? Right? But he does. When we talk about this topic now, I didn't really know the term toxic masculinity back then, but even just from looking at it, being like, wow, just the idea that someone might think of him, a stranger, a certain way, alters his behavior for what he wants. And all it really was a pink-colored milkshake. Right? I'm pretty sure he would have had no problem if it was a, chocolate milkshake, vanilla milkshake, but because it was a pink milkshake, he was like, nope, I can't order it. No way. He refused to, but he loved it. He loved it so much. He loved it so much. I think about the underlying problem, which is somewhere along the way, he must have learned like, hey, pink does not equal being a man. Therefore, I must make sure I don't do anything associated with pink, even though it's something that he wants, that he likes, right? And even thinking about the color pink, I was thinking about that today too. I was like, hey, Jocelyn, if I think about our Instagram photo scheme, our first picture that we took together, all the art, the one that, I don't know if the listeners even know this, but there was a lot of different options that Jocelyn kind of gave to me. It was like, hey, here's our picture. Here's a bunch of different color schemes. What do you like? I think you were like, okay, well, I kind of like these ones. I think we narrowed down to two. And one of them you said was, well, this one, which is pink. And I was like, honestly, I think this one looks the best.
And I was so surprised. I was so shocked that you had picked that one.
I think I could kind of tell. I think you were surprised that I picked it. If I think about it, though, if that was my friend, no way. He'd be like, no, you got to get me like, I don't know, blue, black, like some...
Black and red.
Black and red or something like that. But I was like, no, you know what? It looks nice. I don't think it's a problem. Maybe for this one, it didn't apply to me. But yeah, I think growing up, I would definitely say, yeah, even just like colors. It's very sectioned off between boys and girls. Sometimes I see online, I see like those gender reveal videos, and obviously the boy gets the blue, the girl gets the pink. I think that is just one example of a very set society standard that gets put out there. If you want to go buy things for boys, it's got to be blue. If you want to go buy things for girls, it's got to be pink. I feel like sometimes people don't even question that. It's like, oh, but why is that? Why can't we all enjoy different colors? Why is it such a big deal? But that's my example of someone who's like, you know what? Pink is a problem because I'm a guy and I can't have that because I'm afraid what people are going to do. Another example that I think of that I think applies more to people that I know, and again, from me even, is men asking for directions. So I know this is something where, I've seen it with the men in my family growing up. And even I think for me, part of it was, I felt a bit off too. I think there were times just asking for directions. I always didn't understand why that is. I didn't really understand what the underneath problem is. But if I had to take a wild guess, it's this idea that like, okay, well, to be a man, you must know what you're doing. And to ask questions is to kind of admit that you don't know. And underneath that, it means like, oh, you're a weak person because you didn't know what to do. You didn't know where to go. And that's weak. That's not manly. And therefore, the people who do that refuse to ask for directions and they're stubborn about it. It might look like, on the outside that the guy might look like, oh, they're just like being a stoic, strong figure. But underneath, it's like, oh, my ego and self-esteem is being hurt because I don't know what the directions are. And if I have to go ask, I have to admit that.
It's better to be lost than look like you have to ask for help and appear feminine and weak.
Isn't that kind of crazy? It's like, I'd rather drive off a cliff than to get directions to where I'm supposed to go. It's so bizarre. That's a thing. There are people like that out there still today who refuse to do that. Along the same lines, I think going to see the doctor is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I am definitely someone who had this problem too. So for me, an example of me doing that is like, I knew I should go see a doctor, and people would say like, hey, Danny, you should, go see a doctor. I'm like, no, it's okay. I'll be fine. Whether there's an actual issue or just even thinking about like annual checkups. I'm like, nah, it's okay. I don't need to go. I don't think I ever consciously thought of that as anything to do with masculinity or being a man. But I think if I peel back the layers a little bit, it's that same idea where somewhere along the way, I think I learned that to be a man and to be masculine is to be strong, healthy, and not weak. If you're going to doctors, if you're going to ask questions, it means you're kind of admitting that, oh, maybe there's something going on that's an issue. And you're no longer this ideal that you're supposed to be. That, I think, also it comes along the lines of asking questions. Same idea. So those are, I think, more day-to-day examples that I could think of to bring up. For listeners too, you probably have dealt with that, whether it's for yourself or someone you know. And you might think, okay, well, they just seem so stubborn. I don't understand. Like, why can't they just go ask directions? Why can't they just go see a doctor? Why can't they just order that food they want to eat, even though the color is a bit pink? What's the big deal? I think the awareness piece that I want to bring up is to say, hey, probably something else going on, something else underneath that's going on. I think we can question those and challenge the people. I think if I could go back in time, I'd ask that friend to be like, so what exactly is the issue here that makes you not want to order something that you want? You're going to pawn off that part to your girlfriend. She's just going to pass it to you anyways. Just get it yourself. What's the big deal? But to him, it was a big deal.
I want to riff off of that specific example a little bit because besides the very obvious things that are surprising about it, the fact that he didn't want to be associated with the color pink, I want to dig a little deeper here because you mentioned, and sorry to pick on your friend, but he didn't want the server to think that he was a girly dude. Mm-hmm. So let's back up here. He didn't want the server to think he was a girly dude. Why is that such an issue? He was sitting with his girlfriend. Not that he needed to be. He should be able to go to Dimitri, sit down, order a pink milkshake and peel a banana and eat it in front of everyone if he really wants to without worrying. But let's just say he needed to feel secure. He was with his girlfriend, a display of heterosexuality that he should have been comfortable with himself, but he didn't want to come off as girly in any way. That is not good. And I think if the server was a man or a woman, I think he probably would have had the same reaction. I don't want to speak for him, but in this case, it was a woman, right? It was a waitress.
Yeah.
I do want to touch a little bit on how women have incorporated some of these toxic traits, or incorporated is not the right word, but we were conditioned with them too, so we have certain expectations of men. As much as toxic masculinity hurts women and overall society in the usual ways, such as with domestic violence, men not being able to express themselves and talk through their emotions, so relationships not being as fulfilling or enriched as they could be, men not addressing their mental health issues and it coming out as, unfortunately, mass shooter attacks, for example, or increasing rates of suicide in men. These are all from headlines. These are all factual examples. One other little thing to talk about is how women sometimes need to check their biases as well. For example, I can't remember if I saw this as a social media post or if I read it somewhere, but a woman was saying that she really was trying to get her husband to open up. Like you mentioned, Danny, he never cried. Then when he did open up and share some of the hard things he was going through and that he wasn't able to handle, she admitted that she saw him as weak and it affected how she saw him. And I think that was really eye-opening for me. I know that there are also women out there who are attracted to that stereotypical tough guy who is really into sports, doesn't wear pink. I would like to say that as much as toxic masculinity hurts us in the very typical ways that I mentioned before, I think that it can also prevent us from, like you mentioned at the very beginning of the episode, Danny, for people loving each other for who they are truly. Does that make sense?
It does. Like with the example you just gave too, where you're like, yeah, there are people out there, women who like men who are that stereotype. When you're saying that too, I was like, well, yeah, I think it's okay if that's what they're attracted to, if they like it.
Sure.
And if that works for them, great. But if that guy decides to share some vulnerabilities and then get shamed for it,
exactly,
then yeah, that's the problem. I think it's definitely like there are extremes. I think there's a lot of things in between as well. It's a nuance where I'm like, okay, I know I'm giving off a lot of examples. We're giving like a high overview. There are some, I think, where some of the traits work for people, but it's when if somebody does add additional stuff to it where there is that shaming and they can't be themselves, and then so they just kind of like put that wall back up and said, okay, well, clearly sharing my feelings with people is going to get me in trouble, then I'm going to go back to being that stereotype again, who of a guy who doesn't say anything and just doesn't open up because they learn that, oh, even though their girlfriend might ask them to, when they finally do, their girlfriend's like, oh, you know what? I don't like that. That's definitely, I guess, the other side of it. It's like, you know, we're talking about like, yes, we should definitely be aware of these things. But if somebody is trying to, let's say, improve themselves, let's say they see some of these traits and they're like, you know what? I don't like them. I want to be, let's say, I want to grow from it. But yeah, if they're around people who won't allow them to, then it's not really going to work out either.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. A couple more examples I have actually where talking about what is expected of being a man and also, I guess, in a way, what's expected of being a woman. I asked this question one time to a couple of my guy friends. I said, hey, would you be okay with it if your girlfriend or wife makes more money than you? It was actually a good split down the line. I think half was like, no, I'm not okay with that.
Whoa.
And half was like, yeah, that's cool. I wouldn't mind that. That's cool. Fine by me. I found that very interesting. I just asked it for fun, but I didn't really actually think that there would be problems. Not problems, but like issues from someone that said, yeah, you know what? As a guy, I have to be the one that makes more money. I can't have my partner make more money than me. And I found that interesting. So I'm like, oh, interesting. I wonder why. Because it sounds great to me. I don't see what. I'm like, oh, I don't mind that. I don't mind if my girlfriend makes more money or if my partner makes more money. That actually sounds great to me.
It's funny you mentioned that, Danny, because I'm part of a forum. It's like this forum for like-minded 30-year-olds or like 30-somethings. And there was a post just yesterday that a woman put in where she was asking the group for advice. She makes a lot more money than her boyfriend, and she was asking for guidance on how to navigate it. And all the other women in the comments were giving her tips and tricks of like, oh, let him do this, let him show his love in this way, like don't pay for things like this. And it's so funny because there are no posts like that for men being like, hey, I make significantly more money than my girlfriend. What should we do here? It's funny that these women are being so careful about their partner's egos because of these gender norms that are so pervasive.
I imagine there's none for the men's side because that's the expectation.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, yeah, that's how it's supposed to be. Therefore, why even ask any questions about that? Once that reverses where, oh yeah, the woman makes more money, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, what do I do? It's such foreign territory. I don't know what to do here. But I think that fits into, again, ideals of what men and women are supposed to do. In this case, what a man is supposed to do. So, I mean, I don't know who this person is, obviously, but if she's asking these questions, I wonder if the boyfriend's like, well, yeah, I don't make as much, so maybe he feels emasculated, right? It's like, oh, she makes more money than me. I'm not manly now.
Mm.
Now, why do we tie ourselves to that? I don't know. I don't really have an answer to that, but that's one aspect. I think along the same lines of the woman makes more money. What about stay-at-home parent, let's say?
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure that the majority of the time it is expected that the woman stays home with the kids. And I think it's looked at as more okay that the guy is the one who continues working. But let's say, the guy is the one who wants to stay at home to take care of kids and so forth. I think there's going to be a lot of pushback for that scenario, even though in the day, like, well, as long as the parents are taking care of the kids, I don't think it's a big issue. But I think there is a societal norm that who does what is, again, expected. There's an idea of who should be doing certain things. That also feels weird to me because I think about how I remember growing up too, that this, maybe not so much now, but I remember growing up with this idea that women are the one who cooks. Right? Like that's a woman's job. And as a guy, you have your job. And if you like cooking, that's weird or it's girly. Like, oh, that's a feminine thing to do. Why do you want to learn how to cook? But at the same time, so many professional chefs are men. And that always kind of throws me off because why is it that, oh, if it's a profession, somehow it's like, ooh, good for you. But if you want to just cook to eat,
care for your home, care for your household.
Yeah, that somehow that looks wrong. And same with another profession, sewing, learning how to sew, learning how to fix clothes, the idea of being a seamstress. And it's like, okay, there are tailors do the same thing. And it's like, oh, as long as you change the name for what the profession is, somehow it's like, oh yeah, oh, you're a tailor? Oh, amazing. It's good stuff. But if you're like, oh, I sew, then that's so unmanly of you. Mm-hmm. It's such a weird thing sometimes. Like as we talk about it now, it's like some of these things I find it very bizarre sometimes that these words and ideas get attached to who we're supposed to be. And it can be so boxed in or narrow-minded. Sometimes it drives me nuts a little bit. I'll say that. One other example that I just wanted to bring up because I thought it was hilarious. This was, again, thanks to Reddit. So this woman, she was complaining that she was like, yeah, my boyfriend, I find he has a hard time just like cleaning himself. Like he just seems a bit dirty sometimes. And I don't understand what it is. And then she goes, I asked him and I said, hey, like, do you shower? Like, do you take care of yourself and things like that. And he's like, yeah. No, I shower. I shower and everything. And then she's like, okay, but like, do you get everywhere? Because I think you kind of smell like poop sometimes. He's like, oh, well, I wipe and stuff. And she's like, yeah, but do you wash? Like, do you wash your ass? and he's like, what do you mean? And she's like, like, do you like use soap and like wash that area? And he's like, ugh, no, I can't touch my own ass. There's gay. She goes, I can't believe that he thinks that doing something like that will make him gay. I think the whole entire comment section, everyone just like ripping on her for that one, or ripping on the guy, really. And I don't think it's a troll. I thought that was a real post. But just this idea that there's someone out there, a guy, who is so, I don't know what it is. Is it insecurity? Is it this idea of who a man is supposed to be?
You're not on TikTok, Danny, so I can tell you it's not a troll. It was a trend on TikTok that people were sharing that men don't wash their butts. Like, it's a thing.
That was a thing?
It's a thing.
Okay, so... I don't know what to say to that. It's just so... I don't have words to really respond to that. Anyways, I guess my point is for that one is just to say like, hey, that's a thing. And that's just taking things a bit too far.
Let's retitle this podcast episode. It should be Toxic Masculinity. Do you wash your butt?
I'm okay with that if we want to do that. So clearly, lots of examples. I'm sure there's a lot more. I would definitely say, hey, for listeners, when you hear this, if you have examples, I would love to hear it. I think share it with Jocelyn and I. I think we definitely would love to hear what other examples there are out there. However, I do think one thing we should definitely discuss, at least briefly, is do you think, is there a solution to all of this or anything you think would be helpful? And maybe I'll start off by just saying that I think if someone was to come across a situation where they see it for themselves, or, if you're in a situation where you can, maybe call it out and be like, hey, that's actually not cool. That's not a cool thing to do. Maybe the person doesn't realize it for whatever reason. Maybe just help people be a bit more aware that, it's okay to be themselves. Yes, there's a lot of pressure from society and other people as well, unfortunately, to be a certain way. But we are individuals. I think we should try to be our authentic selves when we can, and more the better, because I think that's how we can thrive.
I think that the solution is sort of already in place. With every year that goes by and more of these topics are being brought to light, I think the recognition and awareness helps so much. I wouldn't have been able to have this conversation with a man when I was in high school. The fact that I can now, and I know that the next generation, my cousins who are teenagers, are aware of this topic, gives me some hope that we might be able to break these stereotypes down. I think that you're right that calling out that behavior, when you're out with your friend at Dimitri's and they refuse to order a pink milkshake, calling it out and asking them why and trying to reteach them what toxic versus not toxic masculinity really is helpful. I also think it starts from a young age, right? Not putting boys down for crying, showing emotion, not putting boys down for not liking sports, not teaching young boys and girls that the worst thing you can be is a girl is especially helpful.
I think those are all great points. That point you made about actually being able to talk about it is actually a good one. I didn't even think about that, how times have changed enough that we can actually have the discussion and share it amongst people. And I hope that having this conversation hopefully leads to more, so we can continue this and try to improve and help everyone thrive more in their lives.
And wash their butts.
And to wash their butts, because that's important. So I think that's it for me. Jocelyn, do you have anything else?
Nope, let's wrap it up.
Okay, well, thank you all listeners for tuning in for another episode of Why Can't We Talk About It? We will be back next week with another episode from Danny and Jocelyn. Have a great week, and we will talk to you then. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.